Okay, good morning, grade 7 learners. For those at home, I hope you're keeping warm and well. For those in class, I hope you're studying hard and using your time wisely. For today's history lesson, I'm going to continue with the slave trade, but I'm going to focus on the slave hardships for this lesson. So before we carry on, if you haven't marked activity 2.1, the answers are on the board. Your answer can be very similar to mine, doesn't have to be exactly, but if you're unsure, rather copy down my answer. So your teacher can pause here. Then here I've got activity 2.2's answer, again, very similar or such. Just for question 4, it needs to be in paragraph form. If it was in bullets, you don't get your 5 marks. Very important, if your question specifies to write it in a paragraph or to list or to tabulate, you need to do it. If not, no mark allocation. Right, so you can pause here as well. Okay, so today I'm going to focus on page 107 and 108. This is the start of Unit 3, Slavery in the American South. Very important, this unit is quite large and in depth. You'll see there's about 4 or 5 activities in this unit alone. So we focus at an average of about 2 to 3 activities a week for history, geography, 1, maybe 2 a week, depending on the workload. So before we carry on, just a bit of terminology. The word branded, right? It's when the slave's owner's initials would be burnt onto the slave's skin with a red hot iron. Sorry, our dog's just drinking water in the background. Anyways, inhumane means very cruel. Humiliation is when someone says something horrible about you that makes you feel very unhappy, right? That actually occurs quite often, but it was very common during the slave trade. Psychological, it has to do with your state of mind. Merchandise means to buy goods. Subjects, not the ones you take at school. Subjects are people over which a king rules. And then corruption is very bad, corrupt behavior. So it's doing things that are unlawful and wrong. And then Negro is an outdated term for African Americans. And this term is obviously used quite frequently during these times. We won't refer to this word in modern times. So please refrain from using it. Then reasons for use of slaves in America. So again, this is just a summary of what's on the pages. Your teacher can pause here and read through, but it's just a catch up. Some of it I've already discussed in the previous video as well. So the climate and soil in the southern states of North America made it suitable for planting crops. Farmers established huge plantations of tobacco, cotton, rice, indigo, and sugarcane. America was a British colony. An industrial revolution had just begun. There was enormous need for raw materials, which could not be grown in Britain because of unsuitable climate. So Britain looked to America to supply all raw materials. So because America had been given this offer to grow, they were in desperate need for workers. And because contracted workers can tend to be either limited or very costly, they eventually looked into slavery because, as mentioned before, the slave trade was very profitable. It was much cheaper to work with slaves. I'm not saying it was better to work with slaves, but for the Americans, it was a quick fix. And they didn't think of what could happen afterwards. Right, so there at the bottom, plantation owners were dissatisfied with the system because workers left their service too soon. So here's where we speak of the contract workers. They were unhappy because the people that worked on the plantations only worked for limited hours. And because America was pushed to get these things out, they wanted people to work for longer hours in a day. There are obviously not enough contracted workers, and America rather wanted permanent slaves who could not leave. Because at the end of the day, time is money. And at this point, the only thing America could think of was getting the product out and getting the money for it. So there were 4 types of plantations that we looked at. Cotton on the top left, tobacco that's normally used for cigarettes and then snuff as well, rice and sugarcane. So there's an image of all 4. So here I'm going to explain to you how slaves were captured, sold, and transported. It's about a 13-step process. You don't need to know it off by heart, but a good idea is better than nothing. So I'm going to allow your teacher to pause here and to read through. There are some images to help you as well. Then again, it goes from step 7 to step 12. Your teacher can just read through this with you. And then the last step, page 13, step 13 is on the board as well. So in the previous slides, I showed you now how the slaves were captured, sold, and transported. Now, in today's activity, we're going to focus on, first things first, the pros and cons of using a contracted or indentured worker versus a slave. But we're also going to look at the slave hardships. So this slide is very important. So slaves are carried by Portuguese with cargo ships. So it's inhumane to think about it, because cargo ships are purely used for cargo, and cargo is the transporting of goods across the ocean. So, but these ships were now designed for carrying slaves. So we've spoken about this before, and we used the analogy of saying we are packed together like sardines in a tin. But if we look here, the conditions on slave ships were horrible. So first things first, there was no room for movement. If you look on the right-hand side, all those dark spots are slaves lying basically on top of one another. So 600 slaves a ship. If you think in your classroom, you're currently between 10 to 15 learners now in your class. Imagine just your classroom alone with 50 people on top of one another. It's uncomfortable. Then secondly, they didn't wear any clothes. So, you know, they were treated like dogs, essentially. They were chained. They sat between each other's legs in the bottom hull of the ship. The hull is like an empty space. Space where at the bottom of the ship where they kept things. In the hull, you did not have any windows to look outward. There was no place to lie down or change position. Lots of diseases such as scurvy and dysentery. So we're going to speak about these diseases going forward. They lay in their own filth, because you can think for yourself, there's no bathroom facilities, there's no movement for that matter. The smell was unbearable, not just from their filth, but from their personal hygiene. There's no ventilation and such. They had little water and food. 15% of the people died on boats. So if there were 100 people in a ship, despite the fact that the top bullet says 600, just imagine if there are 100 people in a room, 15 of those people would die each time. Some children died from hunger, and many slaves were thrown overboard. And they were probably thrown overboard for misbehaving or causing havoc or so. So in your one activity, I'll speak of, please make a mind map of the slave hardships. I then refer to these bullets. So your teacher does not need to put this on the board because it is in your textbook. So here's the instruction for activity 2.3. Please read pages 107 to 108. You might need to refer to the previous pages we did last week as well. At the top of a new page, please write this heading for me, paste in your activity and complete. For activity 2.4, in the top of another page, you write this heading for me, you paste in your activity and complete. For your mind map, you are allowed to use color, and you are allowed to use print and your black pen and such, but please no Cokies, no highlighters. If you want to draw pictures, you're welcome, but very important, I want at least 10 difficult issues of why it was inhumane or unbearable to be a slave on a ship. So I spoke about this earlier in the video, but it's also on your, in your textbook. All right, I want you guys to study hard, and then we'll chat again during next week's video.